Get behind me, Satan. It sounds like something from Saturday Night Live. Isn't that special? Peter was called, or it was told to get behind Jesus. When Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," not because Jesus decided that Peter was all of a sudden some supernatural being called Satan, and he needed to exorcise the demons or something like that. He was called to get behind him because Peter had decided to put his concerns, his thoughts, his worries about Jesus on things that didn't have to do with the divine, had to do with comfort, really. Peter didn't want to hear that Jesus was going to have to be crucified. He didn't want to hear the things that Jesus was going to have to go through, and so Peter decided, hey, you know what, Jesus, you don't have to do those things. And Jesus had to put Peter in his place because otherwise he would be following someone else. Not Jesus, not God. Satan, for example. And the whole premise here is to remind us who it is that we follow. Who do we follow? Who do you follow? If you're following your own way, well, that's not God. If you're following Christ, well, that's great. Or maybe even if you're following Satan, that might be more problematic than following your own way. But the ultimate line here with Jesus, when he was talking to Peter, is there is one way. There is only one way. It seems obvious. It seems obvious that there should be only one way, but we all get lost. We all follow our own way. Even teachers, even those who shouldn't be following any other way than Jesus, get lost. I am the first to tell you need to understand that I am not perfect. If you don't believe me, this is a picture of my wife. She's usually in the gathering room. She'll be with the ladies doing the mother's group. You can go talk to her. She'll tell you all about my imperfections. Okay, let's be clear. I am not perfect. I will fail you. If I haven't failed you yet, just wait. I will. I will fail God. He knows. I still do. I still will. I strive for excellence, but I can play the part of Satan. How many preachers are going to tell you that? That's the facts. You need to understand that. That I do follow my own desires. As much as I try to put other people first, as much as I strive to put God first, I will follow my own way sometimes. I will find convenience at your cost. That's my confession. And if you think that somehow that's not the truth, if you don't recognize that fact, then hear it now. And anybody else who would pretend to be a leader and say that they're perfect are nothing other than little miniature Satans trying to be perfect in everybody's eyes, because we're all human. Until Jesus comes back, ain't none of us perfect. So I wanted to get into something that maybe you're aware of. Joel Osteen took a little flack this week. Now, if you're on Facebook, right, then I'm sure that you're having very nuanced conversations about all of the details, sussing out the facts very rationally, and nobody's lobbing any 140-character conversations back and forth each other, right? You're all very rational. I'm sure that that's the case. And so in that rational conversation, I'm going to wade ever so gently into those floodwaters. So Joel Osteen, if you don't know, is the pastor of a congregation his church has around 15,000 seats. I think it's actually closer to 17,000, but we'll forget about those 2,000 and we'll round that down to about 15,000 seats. He caught some flack because he opened his church a little late. He's in Houston where the flooding happens, and he opened his church for people to come in maybe later than he should have, and he's protecting, holding about 300 people. Just to let you have some scale, right? His 15,000-person congregation is holding 300 people. If we, Crossroad, were to be a sanctuary, we would hold about 300 people. Okay, just a little perspective about what kind of buildings can hold 300 people. Between our two, we could probably harbor about 300 people. So I was thinking about it, and, I wanted to be rational, and I want you to hear, right, what my thoughts would be as a pastor, as a leader of a congregation, and maybe those would be Joel Osteen's thoughts. The first is, people are dirty. People are just dirty, man. And when you have people coming in from floods, and there's no showers, and there's all kinds of mud and everything everywhere, man, that is dirty. That is dirty, dirty. And if you're going to have hundreds of people or maybe thousands of people in your congregation, it's going to cost thousands or maybe tens of thousands of dollars to clean, replace, and repair just the wear and tear from people being in that building. And so there's this kind of selfishness, this calculation that has to happen. Hey, if I'm the pastor and I open my doors, my church is going to get trashed. Okay, well, I look at Joel Osteen and his congregation and his $10.5 million mansion, and I say, you know what, maybe that's your cross to bear. Why do you have a church? Why is it that church even exists? Is it so that it can be nice and pretty? Or is it so that it can be the bulwark, the fortress of God's people, the lighthouse in the middle of the storm? And in this case, literally. Maybe he should have opened his doors and shown that God was more important than his carpets. Okay. Well, you know what? The other thing you're not thinking about is that place would have had to have been staffed. I think people think that church just happens. It doesn't just happen. Crossroad doesn't just happen. It happens because of the offering plate. And if you're not putting in the offering plate, that means somebody else has to put in your share so that we can continue on. And his church, 15,000 member congregation, is no different than our congregation. If he's going to open his doors, he needs people to come and do their share, literally in the middle of the storm. That means that people are going to have to leave their homes to go and be servants in the middle of a storm. That is a high bar to ask of people, to put themselves in danger to go and do for God. Well, we call that cross-bearing also. That's exactly what it means to bear the cross. It means that there are people who need your help, and maybe you have to put yourselves out. Maybe you have to put yourself second. Maybe you have to do your bit to lift up that weight. That cross is not light. But as a pastor, I can easily sympathize with Joel's desire maybe to have to call people. He didn't want to do that, and I would be reticent to want to do that as well. But maybe we're called to do that. Now the biggest thing, the thing that I'm going to throw him under the bus about right now, is that he said publicly he was never asked to open his building. That's what he said. He even got on Good Morning or the Today Show, and he said basically the same thing. He said, look, I was waiting for the civic centers to be full, and then I was going to open my building. That's what he said. And there's a reason for that, and that's because he was following the wrong authority. He wasn't following Jesus. Jesus already called and told him to do what he needed to do thousands of years before Harvey ever hit Houston. And by waiting for the civil authorities to tell him what to do, he was following the civil authorities. Now, I don't want to besmirch our civil authorities. In fact, let's just take a second and recognize there was a police officer who was leaving his family to go and serve the people of Houston, who gave his life because he was swept away in that flood, which is exactly what Joel Osteen was called to do. So when he says he's following the civil authorities, he's not following Jesus by his own admission. He's saying, I didn't decide to follow our Lord, I decided to follow our mayor, which is not a bad way, but it's not the best way. It's not the way that he's called to be as a leader. See, we all need to see Christ in our midst. And when there's crisis, when there's problems, that's when we really need to see Christ. God did not send this hurricane. Let me say that again. God, the Almighty, did not send this hurricane to Houston. The hurricane came to Houston because we live in a sinful and a broken world. And until Jesus comes again, it will continue to be a sinful and a broken world. But even in that sin, especially because of it, and even in that brokenness, even especially because of it, that's where God can be found. What a light to the world Joel Osteen's congregation could have been if his was the first place that opened up. What if his was the place that said, hey, you know what? This is not a perfect place, the church. We've got some flooding in our basement. Don't park there, but you can come to the upper rafters, to the nosebleed seats. The water won't find you there. It's imperfect, the church, but it's a safe haven. Wow. That would have been a great message. That would have been a powerful message. Well, instead of that, instead of doing what he should have done, Joel Osteen and his congregation, let other people do the work, the good work, and let the message fall to pieces. I'll have you know, we at Crossroad hold up Joel Osteen's end for him. He doesn't even know it. You may not know that the church has a fantasy football league. Did you know that? We just drafted last Friday or a couple Fridays ago. This is our third season, fantasy football. If you don't know what fantasy football is, it's a silly game played by men and women. We play this silly game all through the football season. But what we do as the fantasy football league is we take dues. It costs $40 to play in that league. First place gets a payout, second place gets a payout, third place gets their money back. Last place, we just make fun of for the rest of the year. All of the money, though, doesn't go to the payouts. A good hunk of that, the lion's share of those dues, goes back to the church. And I hold on to them. I hold on to this cash. And then what happens is, over the year, as will happen this coming year, people will stop by the church, and they'll look for handouts. Now, I can't help myself when people come and they talk to me looking for handouts. First thing I say is, well, why are you coming to me? Where's your church? Oh, well, I watched Joel Osteen on television. Have you called him first? Well, he's not going to take my call. He's not going to be able to help me. Well, let's talk about then what it is the purpose of the church is supposed to be. The church isn't a place where you come to feel good or you watch on TV to make you feel like somehow Jesus loves you. It's a place that you interact. You have relationships with God and His people. If you're watching on TV, if Joel Osteen is your pastor, why didn't you call Joel first? Why are you talking to me? And the reason is simple. Because Joel Osteen, for all his goodness, you need to hear that he does goodness, for all his goodness, isn't there. He's not helpful. So what happens is these people come to me, and the fantasy football money I hold on to, and I help these people. You know, if they're hungry, I buy them food. We go and we buy food. I try not to hand out cash. If their gas tank is empty and they're looking for jobs, let's go to the gas tank. Let's go to the BP on the corner, and we go. And they drive me there, and I pay with cash, and I fill it up, and we have a coffee, and we talk. If they need money, if they need something to buy for their food, then I'll go to the grocery store with them. Our fantasy football team and you all have fed babies, have given people jobs, have given me time to be with people, to talk to them, to find out, hey, what's really going on in your life that you have to come to me? And sometimes they're good conversations. Sometimes they're just people who are down their luck and they need some support, some encouragement, and sometimes there's something going on. Sometimes I got to play pastor and I got to hold up the mirror and I say, hey, look, man, your alcoholism is getting in your way. Your gambling problem has gotten in your way. The reason you're here with me today is because you went down to bet on some dogs instead of filling your gas tank. And then I fill their gas tank, and we have a prayer, and they go on their way, and I hope maybe God can do something with them with that. This is what small groups are all about. Small groups are not a program for our congregation. They're where the rubber hits the road. We have programs. We have ways in which people can go and show God's love. We have Soup Kitchen and God's Garden and fantasy football and all these other things. We've got lots of programs. Small groups are not a program. This isn't just something for you to partake in. This is church as God intended it to be. And in my small groups, I have brought groceries to people who couldn't get out. I have brought meals. Ashley and I have a shorthand. Whenever I call her, I say, hey, I need a meal made. We have like this taco dish that she makes up. She can just whip it up and send it on out. I have never eaten that taco dish, not once, but she's made it gobs of times in our home. And it works like this. I say, I need the thing. She makes it. I swing home, pick it up, and go and bring it to whatever group I'm in at that time because somebody just had a baby or somebody just had a death or somebody just broke something. Broke a relationship, broke a leg, broke a car, broke a tire. Something happened in their life. I've picked up kids from events. I know where to pick up kids from the soccer field and the baseball team. The reason we have these small groups isn't so it's like another program that you can go and be a part of. This is who we are. This is church. Small groups are church. It's where we practice our muscles. Just like lifting weights makes your muscles stronger, small groups makes your unselfishness muscles stronger, if I can coin a term. And how does that happen? Because when you're not doing for yourself, when you're doing for others, when you're not doing for your family, when you're doing for others, when you're not doing what's easy and comfortable, and you're doing what's maybe difficult and you don't want to do for others, that becomes easier to do. You get your own short language, a shorthand. You become better, and all of a sudden you become a follower of Jesus instead of a follower of yourself or Satan or some other variation. We call that bearing crosses, which is what we're called to do. Which is to be what God has called us to be. If you're going to be all that God has called you to be, you can't grow more and more selfish. You have to be less and less selfish. You have to be more and more godly to be who God has called you to be. Now here's the thing. You all have abilities. You have strengths. You have things that you're really good at that you can help other people with when they find themselves in their flood, when life all of a sudden comes and hits them from behind. The value of being in a small group is that we get to help each other. This is what Paul said in Romans 12. This is what we just read. We have gifts that differ according to grace given to us. To the prophecy in proportion to faith. Ministry in ministering. The teacher in teaching. The exhorter in exhorting. The giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. These are just some of the strengths. These aren't all of the strengths. Some of you, it could be the quilter in quilting, right? There are all kinds of things that we find ourselves. The young in youthfulness, the old in wisdom. You all have strengths that you can provide. I have strengths. Turns out, I'm a jibber-jabber. I can talk all day in front of all of you. This is my strength. I give it to you. Yeah, shut up, Pastor. I'm done hearing you. Okay, but you get what I'm saying, right? And you have strengths that you can give me. And together we are strong. Look, this is the next verse. God said, God has given you many gifts. Be sure to use them to make lots of money. Oh, wait, no, that's not what he said. No, God said something else. He said, you have abilities. Love one another with mutual affection. That's what God said to do with your gifts, to love one another. This phrase, one another, happens 60 times in the New Testament. You can't one another yourself. You have to one another someone else. That happens in small groups because you all have abilities, but this group is just too big for you to know what each other's abilities are. You can't do that in the large group. You have to do it in the small group. Now, some of you aren't in groups yet. Do your excuses look like Joel Osteen's excuses? Oh, I can't get in there because, people, I just don't want people in my life. They just make it dirty. My life is so nice and neat. I have it orderly, and if I got in a small group, it would just make things messy. Oh, okay, time to sacrifice. Time to bear a cross. Oh, I don't want to be in a small group. It wouldn't work for me. Well, if you're not in a small group, then you're depriving someone of your shelter, of your gifts, of your ability. Oh, I don't want to be in a small group. It's just too busy. Well, the storms will rage. Life is busy. And then when you're full of things and you can't go anymore, then the hurricane comes. The small groups, the church, that's our shelter. You all need shelter. We all need shelter. I need shelter. You need shelter. Do your excuses look like Joel? Small groups just aren't an idea. They're not just a program. They're how we follow God. They're how we invite Him into our life so that we might be transformed from sinner into saint. And it's muddy, and it's dirty, and it never happens at a good time, but it always happens for a good reason.